Hello, class, and welcome to the finale of Hamlet, our final video reading review lecture. We'll pick up with Act 5, Scene 1. During this scene, we learn how old Hamlet is. Uh, there's a little comic relief with the gravedigger. Remember, during these tragedies, people went to the theater to be entertained. So before we have the bloodbath that is the ending of Act 5, we have a little comic relief from the gravedigger here. When Hamlet comes upon him and he's talking about what happens when you die and how our bodies decompose, and he has a specific skull. When Hamlet realizes it was the court jester, um, he really is moved by it. It was someone who essentially took care of him and made him laugh and things of that nature. And it definitely leads Hamlet to reflect on the preciousness of life, um, and the description of what happens when you die to your body is very graphic. Um, and it definitely leads Hamlet into a moment of deep reflection. Um, and as the scene moves on around line 190, Hamlet and Horatio start talking about all these famous and well respected uh, kings and generals in history and how they all essentially decompose. All of the earthly distinctions that we have disappear in death, social class, money, all that stuff. William S. Burroughs perhaps made one of the most interesting observations regarding that when he said, "Who wants to be the richest man in the graveyard? You can't take it with you." And we still talk about that now, and they were still thinking about that and talking about that hundreds of years ago. So yet another aspect of life that we learn about by reading this play: themes of love, grief, justice, hubris, humility, life, death, the afterlife, forgiveness, guilt, denial. I mean, these are all themes in the play. Hamlet finally realizes it's Ophelia, right? And before he's able to jump in the grave, Laertes confronts the priest. And this is where we are are provided with very clear proof that her death was suspect and was probably a suicide, because if it wasn't for Claudius and Gertrude intervening, she would not be buried in that cemetery. Because if you kill yourself in Catholic Christian faith, it's a mortal sin, right? And right, so Laertes reacts almost violently with the priest, right? He says, "What ceremony else?" And the priest says, "Nothing," right? No more be done. Line 218, "We should profane the services of the dead to sing a requiem and such rest to her as to peace parted souls." And Laertes says, "Lay her in the earth, and from her fair and unpolluted flesh may violets spring. I'll tell thee, churlish priest, a ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling." Right? He's very angry with the priest, and essentially makes reference that the priest is going to be howling in hell. Again, Hamlet, when he realizes it's Ophelia, he jumps out. Laertes jumps in the grave. Hamlet jumps in the grave with him. They grapple. Hamlet tries to outdo him in terms of sorrow, saying, "You're her brother," right? Line 255. "I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not with all their quantity of love make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her?" Um, Again, is it too little, too late? Is it an afterthought? I mean, she's already dead, and now he's professing his love for her in some ways to outdo Laertes. In some ways, too, I almost think the way that he deals in the situation with Claudius is also almost an afterthought, right? I mean, Claudius is his guilt in the next scene, right? His guilt, and I guess I'm skipping ahead to 5-2, sorry. But, his guilt is out, right? As everybody lays dying, and then Hamlet stabs him and gives him the poison cup. But again, the poison was put on the sword by Laertes. The poison was put in the cup by Claudius. What has Hamlet really done to enact his revenge? Is his revenge successful? Is justice served? It's hard to say because so many other people die before Claudius does, and there's only one person who deserves the revenge and the justice that Hamlet is trying to enact, and that's Claudius. And think about all the people that die, right? In the meantime, first there's Polonius, then there's Ophelia, then there's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, then there's Gertrude, then there's Laertes, and then finally we get to Hamlet and Claudius. So to me, the whole ending is extremely problematic. And I think the most important moment of the play is Act 3, Scene 3, when Hamlet lets his hubris and his illogical decision making, right, fueled by hubris, take over his logical, critical thinking processes, which are so apparent and so clear and so emblematic in many ways of the critical thinking skills in this book. But once he abandons Occam's razor and he lets his irrational and hidden assumptions take over, once he abandons Rogerian strategy and decides that he's 100% right and he's going to do whatever he wants whenever he wants to do it, again, letting his hubris take over, he abandons the dialectic. He does not make concessions or look at things from a Rogerian standpoint. He's very arrogant. He's very rude. He's very disrespectful in Acts 3, Scene 4 onward. And he's completely different than the character from Act Scene 3, 2, 3, 3 prior. Um, Notice how Horatio kind of warns him and says, look, I'll lie for you if you want, so you don't have to do this. You're going to lose this battle. And Hamlet says, I don't think so. Again, is that not hubris? Uh, Maybe. Horatio definitely seems to be the voice of reason in this play. And when he suggests that Hamlet should possibly pause, stall, refrain from fighting Laertes, Hamlet immediately dismisses it, and he has this deeper philosophical reflection on life. It's pretty interesting, and I think the quote is pretty clear and specific in what he's saying. It's lines 206, Act 5, Scene 2. He says, not a whit we defy augury. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. And I think that's an interesting point about life, and that sometimes things happen that you might not be ready for, but you have to recognize that and you have to try. So I think it's a really telling quote and a very philosophical quote. And again, that's his kind of response to Laertes. Nope, I need to be ready for this, even if I don't want to do it. Um, Maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe he should have taken Laertes' advice. This scene, as other scenes, and now that we've kind of finished with the play, start thinking about different ways to analyze it. Um, Obviously, you could look at Ophelia and Gertrude's behavior as women that had to fulfill certain roles, as women that were oppressed. I mean, think about it. Gertrude says, I will obey, I think once or twice in the play to Claudius, but then at the very end, when he says, Gertrude, do not drink, she says, I beg your pardon. She doesn't obey. She dies. Unfortunately, Ophelia also does not obey the advice of her father and her brother, and she also dies. There's something to be said about that. So you could definitely look at this play and the gender roles thrust upon the women, the oppressive, controlling aspects of patriarchal society, forcing them to fulfill these stereotypical roles. Um, you could also look at this play from a queer theory perspective, in that are Hamlet and Horatio just buddies? Or is maybe there's something more there? A lot of scholars have looked at their relationship as a possible one in which homoerotic tendencies and homoerotic ideas are present. And if you kind of go back and look at all their conversations, there's a lot of love, you know, spoken between the two of them. It seems as though perhaps Horatio might have a thing for Hamlet. And notice at the very end, right, as Hamlet's dying, Horatio's like, I'd rather die than be without you. And Hamlet's like, no, don't drink. You need to tell my story. Again, the power of the theater, the power of literature to teach us about the human experience. So not only does Hamlet use the theater, but in the end, the whole idea of using literature, the theater, plays to learn about life is something that Hamlet also advocates for. I mean, personally, I could see someone losing their significant other and not wanting to live on and wanting to join them. But a best friend, would you say I'd rather die than be without you to your best friend? Again, maybe. I'm just saying, I think that scene definitely gives a lot of credence to the possibility that maybe Horatio has feelings for Hamlet beyond just friendship. Um, so again, and the last thing I want to talk about in Act Five, Scene Two, when before the match starts, right? Hamlet kind of apologizes to Laertes, and he says, it wasn't me, it was my madness. Again, so we have this theme of capital punishment, right? What is proper justice for Claudius, which is a modern theme that we're still discussing in our legal systems, our cultures, our societies. I mean, is Hamlet not taking the insanity defense here? He's basically saying it wasn't me. It's not my fault, right? His madness is poor Hamlet's enemy. He says, Act 5, Scene 2, line 226. And what does Laertes say? He says, well, line 232, I am satisfied in nature, whose motive in this case should stir me most to my revenge, but in my terms of honor. Remember, Hamlet's reflecting on honor at the end of Act 4. I stand aloof and will know reconcilement till, by some elder masters of known honor, I have a voice and precedent of peace to keep my name ungored. But till that time, I do receive your offered love, like love, and will not wrong it. He's saying, okay, I got you, but I still need to defend the honor of my father. Remember, his father didn't get a proper burial because Claudius didn't want people to know that Hamlet killed him, so he covered it up, sent him to England, and that's yet another reason why Laertes was fuming. Not only was his father murdered, but no justice was enacted, there was no burial. He feels as though him and his family was disrespected, and he will fight for his family's honor, which is a recurring theme, and we see how Fortinbras and Laertes and Hamlet all react to their family's honor being disrespected in different ways. So, that being said, if you have any questions about the play, please feel free to contact me, and I hope these video reviews are helpful. As Hamlet says, the rest is silence.